Hello, everyone. We're recording.
Hooray!
Finally.
For everyone listening, when this is edited together, it sounds like we were all here on time and everything worked. But, dear listener, reality is often very, very different to the world of edited audio. And today, only one of us was actually here on time, bang on, with everything connected. And it wasn't one of the hosts. So, we are, for the first time, we have a guest. We're going to come to that in a minute because somebody else is going to introduce him. But for now, I'd just like to say hello, everybody.
Hello, Richard.
Hello, Richard.
That's weird.
Say hello, Callum, you ignorant toad.
Hello, Richards. Hello, Harry.
I think you just abbreviate that to a pair of dicks.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a working title that was between two dicks, but
We pushed it back and forth a bit, but nobody arrived with the right thing. So,
and CountrySlide.
So we ended
it
up
was.
with CountrySlide, which Harry, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, I have to say is still the most stupid name for a podcast in the history of mankind, which I have to apologise for inviting you onto a podcast which is full of top content, but just with the title. It would be a bit like, for example, is the finest whiskey in the world is Ardbeg, comes from the beautiful island of Islay, right? But rather than calling it Ardbeg, which has got beautiful connotations of Gaelic peatiness, you called it and said, tastes a bit like TCP. That would be basically it. And that's what they've done with the name of this podcast, CountrySlide. I have whinged about it for quite some time.
you have whinged about it, but there are several things to factor in here. One, it's a unique name, which means we stand out and we can get domain names and stuff like that for it. Two, if you gave it a really good name, it would give people false expectations of what's on the other side of clicking download. And three, Callum came up with it.
Okay. So basically we have to put up with it. Right. Any road. Am I going to introduce our guest, Richard? Do you think that's a good idea?
I think that's a good idea. I think somebody should.
Okay. Right. This is quite an auspicious moment because this is now our fourth episode of CountrySlide, and we did talk about guests, and I demanded, nay, insisted that we got a friend of mine called Harry Hoblin on. Harry is a nurseryman. He is one of the main men at Reimer Tree and Hedge Nurseries, and he is one of those annoying people who, if you have a sort of a preconceived idea about trees, hedges, anything that grows with some wood on, he will go and say, let you speak, and then go, well, that's not actually necessarily the case. So, listeners of CountrySlide, I'd like to introduce you to the all-round tree and hedge growing guru that is Harry Hoblin. Round of applause. Hello, Harry.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
If there's a round of applause for a tree grower and nobody hears it, does it make a sound?
Good point.
That's all my questions gone.
Sorry, Callum.
Anyway, Harry, what I want to know first and foremost, because when you and I first met, it was I plant not quite as much hedge as I lay, but I still plant quite a lot. Tell me what's unique and why you think I might have invited you on to come and chat about stuff around leafy things today.
Whew, that is quite the question. What's unique about our nursery is we are 100% peat free. And if you ask me on a good day, I say we do everything the right way. If you ask me on a bad day, I'll say we do everything the hard way. So that's peat free, rainwater harvesting, low chemical usage.
You grow from seed, don't you?
Yeah, we grow everything from seed and in trays above soil, which is
why?
I'm going to go straight in with the really stupid question of what's the benefit to being peat free?
Okay, here we go. So why peat? Why peat free? We got to save the habitat, right? You guys, you're all country people. You appreciate good habitat, and the peat used for the horticultural industry is it's an abomination. It's bad. We're digging up way more peat than is being produced per year, and absolutely destroying habitat, releasing you know ridiculous amounts of carbon, methane, and there's no need for it. I don't see why we would need to do that. I think I've proven that we can grow without the use of peat, and I don't understand why no one else is. Yeah.
Why, out of interest, do you think that people aren't embracing it then? If you're for all those reasons.
Okay, so there are two main reasons. People are pretty stuck in their ways. They're used to doing what they're used to. So in the UK, we have this big, everyone uses peat to grow because we always have. But you go across to Asia and they're not using peat at all, and that's just what they're used to. And I feel we should be mimicking that. There's absolutely no need for it. And the other reason is cost. Peat is cheap. Peat, all the nurseries that use peat for compost, all the compost companies that use peat, that they build their factories next to a peat bog, so there's very very low travel time, and to begin with was they felt like it was a limitless source, an unlimited source, and that makes things cheap. Unfortunately, it was the wrong thing to do. So here I am trying to prove that we're right.
And when you were setting up doing that, did you have a fair amount of people saying, "Nah, it'll never work. Nah, that won't work. No, you can't do that."
Absolutely. So I remember when we first went to meet the seed supplier in Shropshire. We were talking to them. I'd never met a seed supplier before, and I said what I was planning on doing, and that's setting up a peat-free nursery. And the words that came out of my supplier's mouth were, "You're mad. Why would you do that?" 3 years later, and they're now actually working on reducing their peat usage themselves. So again, I was right. They were wrong. In fact, I can remember back at university. Sorry, Richard. I remember back at university, a lecturer saying, "Oh, we need to be going peat free, but the thing with peat free is you look at what numbers you'd expect to grow, and you have to instantly just take 25% off that, and that's called the peat free tax." But I haven't experienced that myself.
So what is the alternative? What are you using? Is it a mix or is it something completely different?
There are lots of alternatives. What we use is a mixture of rotted wood chip, expanded wood fiber, a little bit of controlled release fertilizer, which isn't my favorite thing in the world, but they're working on it, and coconut coir, which you're going to think coconut coir, that's bad, and it is. I accept that, but we are working towards a coir-free alternative, and I've actually very, very recently found out that my current supplier is working to a coir-free alternative. But that's generally what people use. There are smaller productions around the country that use recycled green waste. They use, again, more rotted wood chip, but without the coir. Uh, People talking about using rotted reeds, like Norfolk reed, Phragmites. And then there's an amazing place up north called Dalefoot that use a mixture of bracken and wool. For me personally, I use rotted wood chip and coir.
And right, okay. So we've established your green credentials here, which I mean is one of the things that made me think as you as a supplier of nearly all of the hedgerow plants that we plant was because although my customers aren't demanding it right now, it's something which is an extra tick in the box because ultimately there will be some bean counting moron like Miliband will come along and suddenly sort of look at my carbon debt or something like that. And I can say, haha, I've got better stuff than you. So talk me through the process because, you know, it, I was Patrick Barkham, the chap who writes in the Guardian, was put something on there that he'd planted 250 acorns to grow into there, and I sort of said, "Have you frozen it?" And he didn't reply to me because he thinks I'm a Nazi. But it's something that I'm quite interested in. Is that actually how do you, as a professional, rather than a writer in the Guardian, how does a professional actually go about growing a load of oak trees from seed?
Okay, well, oaks are a pretty easy one, and I will say that everything I do with relation to germinating seed is the easy way. So I specialize in UK natives, and we're in the UK, so they want to germinate in our conditions. Um, but generally, if you were to use something that's suitable for the UK, you just want to start off by putting the seeds in a bit of compost or maybe a bit of sand and putting them in the fridge for, say, 3 months, tricking them into thinking they're experiencing winter, and then pull them out and put them somewhere warm so they think it's spring, and then they start to grow. That's the easy bit. And we actually skip that stage. Our supplier does all that for us. So I really am cheating. From then, the real hard thing is just keeping them watered. So you want to put those seeds in some compost or maybe in a field. For various reasons, we've chosen to do it in compost and trays, and just kept them fed, kept them watered. If they look like they're wilting, they need more water. If they look like they're rotting, they need less water. And it really is, for UK natives, as simple as that. I'm kind of giving away my secrets here. There are other bits that make it hard, I promise.
When you say feed them, what do you feed them?
So in our mix, we have a controlled release or slow release fertilizer. But as well as that, we use a seaweed extract that seems to give it all lots of good nutrients. And we use an organic granulized fertilizer called Ecor 5. And it's all just your normal basic growing things. So it's your NPK plus a few micronutrients here and there. We're in East Anglia, so we have very, very hard water. We try to harvest as much rainwater as possible, but that is supplemented from an aquifer underneath the nursery, and that actually provides it with a lot of calcium and lime, which is also very important when it comes to growing trees. And the beauty of growing in trays is we have a lot of control over that. So, you know, if something if it's too dry outside, we run the irrigation. If it's too wet outside, we move it in the tunnels and shelter it from the rain. And that's the same for feeding. It means it's very accessible to feed with the fertilizers I've just mentioned.
How many do you actually grow a year?
This year, I looked at the figures earlier today. This year, we produced 300,000 trees on, I think we have 0.8 acres, which is pretty good. I mean, we're not playing with the big dogs yet. Up in Scotland, I won't mention the names, but they're pushing 30, 40 million trees produced a year. We're nowhere near that. But my idea is just to prove that it can be done the inverted commas right way and use that as a blueprint for other people to copy. And hopefully, nursery by nursery, everyone will convert to the good ways.
See, one of the things I'm interested in, right, is the last government, in their infinite wisdom, came up with this stupid idea, as far as I'm concerned, for because they got campaigned at by various people saying we hadn't got enough hedgerows in this country, without actually having any basis in fact about that, and not thinking about it might be a good idea to look after what we've actually got at the moment. And they said, oh well, someone was campaigning for, they wanted some like enough hedgerows that would basically go to the moon and back. 175,000 kilometres more hedgerows in this country. And the government arrived at a figure of 45,000 kilometres of more hedgerows, which we plant at 5 to the metre rather than 6, what DEFRA recommend you do, because we just don't like planting things to die, which they would do in this country. I mean, that I did actually once work it out exactly how many. It's nearly 1 billion hedgerow plants alone. Do we grow anywhere near that amount of hedging plants and trees to reach all these aspirations for reforesting this country so it looks like we're all bloody Robin Hood?
I mean, the short answer is no. We absolutely do not. I didn't know about the the hedge planting figures. That just seems insane. But for woodland planting, I know that I think the target was 30,000 hectares a year we need to be planting until 2050, okay? So I've done some maths. If you're planting, say, 1,500 to 2,000 trees per hectare over, I think this was the plan put out in 2021. So between then and 2050, that's 1.5 billion trees need to be planted between 2021 and 2050. We are currently
Well, I
planting
mean,
it's a crazy figure, isn't it? We're currently planting 13,500 hectares a year. So we need to double what we're planting. But I can tell you that every single year, every tree nursery is selling out of all their stock, and we're having to import from Europe. And there's absolutely no way of hitting that target. No one wants to work in the industry. No one wants to set up a nursery. You know, more recently, DEFRA have, in inverted commas, frozen grants for the time being. There's just absolutely no way that we can 1.5 billion trees plus your, what did you say, 1 billion trees worth of hedging.
yeah.
That's an
Yeah.
absolutely insane figure. No, we're not producing that. There's no way we can produce that.
But it looked absolutely superb on the manifestos. So that's the main thing. You
Oh,
know,
it
I
looked
mean, we can
fantastic.
basically,
Look
force
at
our
us. Well
way to
done.
carbon neutrality. Yes, well done, us. You know, it sounds so brilliant. You can also say, right, we're going to go and plant all these trees and all these hedges. I mean, also, not to the point we haven't got enough trees. We've also got to go and cut down virtually every single bloody piece of bamboo in China, because they seem to be the only things that we're going to cane up our hedges with, because we've got no coppice woods in under management, which is a thing I'm sure that Richard Prideaux is going to agree with, who's does a bit of coppicing on the side as well. But also, we're going to have to go and guard these things, because we have got inundated with bloody deer that want to go and eat all these things we plant, and no one's has got a sensible idea as to how we might control all these deer. And so therefore, we're going to have to live with all this fact that they're going to get eaten. So we have to guard them with single-use plastic. And we've just been hedge planting today. We did 750 meters in rather Somme-like conditions. And because we are, a bit green, we recycled a load of guards from another planting job we'd done and put them on. Of course, they will then break and crap like that. But I thought, the whole idea that we are going to allegedly create this green lung in the head of, I'm going to say his name again. If I say it 3 times, a bit like Beetlejuice, he'll appear in my kitchen and spoil a decent bacon sandwich. But Miliband has got this idea that we're going to get the carbon.
We got Miliband again, number 2.
That's the bingo card filling up.
Carbon neutrality. Honestly, that man, he's allegedly very intelligent, but he ought to come and do a month of apprenticeship at your place, Harry. Would you take Ed Miliband on as an apprentice? Because you struggle for staff, don't you, in nursery work?
We absolutely do. Before I get onto that, where are these trees going to go? You're going to have to take from prime agricultural land, and then what? Where's the food coming from? It all has this horrible knock-on effect that.
Oh, we've done that bit.
Yeah, I know.
There's
your
no more
episodes
food.
1 and 2. We won't go back into it. For listeners, you can just listen back to episodes 1 and 2.
There's no more food. We're just going to plant trees now.
It's insane. You can
What's
forage
bark?
a bit.
Actually, Richard Prideaux, you're a forager. How well do you think you could feed the nation if we did reforest the entire United Kingdom? Right.
Closed canopy.
How much food? Yeah, closed canopy. How much do you reckon you could do with your bow and arrow and your mushroom bag?
Right. So this is something, when we were doing the pre-production bits for this episode, and you kept saying, yeah, you can talk about foraging in woodlands. No point in that did I bring in my half of it, which is foraging inside woodlands is crap. We get asked to come go to other people's land. I'm in this weird position where I get fairly rich people ringing me up and saying, can you come and do a private foraging thing for us? And we go, yeah, fine. And we go down there, and then there's just acres and acres of woodland with bugger all in it. You get mushrooms in there at the right time of year when you get the right activation conditions for the mycelium, but Inside the woodlands, now there's nothing because it's all on the edge. It needs that edge habitat to get all the young leaves, all the flowers, all the bits that you actually forage, because all the fruits that come along after that are just the flowers that got knocked up in the spring. They become the fruits in the autumn. So, yeah, there's not the wild food possibilities inside woodland are very, very poor. Apart from the deer, deer are quite tasty, and grey squirrels.
Yeah. It's do you know what? I eat a lot of venison, and I'll be perfectly honest, I feel a bit gouty these days. It might be the accompanying bottle of claret that I have to go and
Yeah,
say,
I'm sure that's what it is.
little bit
Yeah.
for the stew, the rest for me. Yeah.
Compare you to Joe Rogan. I think we've got two different sort of diet outcomes there.
Yeah. I mean, but I've got more hair than he has. But I wouldn't want to get in a fight with him. Right. So, Harry, we're going to stop grilling you for a moment, and we do a thing here because we're nosy, being country people. We always know what our neighbours are doing. I want to know what you've been up to. So I'm going to start this with Callum first of all. What have you been doing, and how glamorous was it?
I don't think I've gone first yet. I've done a few shoots in London this week, which has been quite fun, but I'm not allowed to talk about them because it's top secret. I always get that. I get that a lot. NDA stuff that I'm not allowed to talk about. That was quite fun. And then on the weekend, I did a driven day. I was shooting for the field, and I went to a estate, Standon Estate, which is a Silver Purdy Award winner.
Silver Lapwing Award.
A silver what?
A silver Lapwing or Silver Purdy Award winner.
A Silver Purdy Award.
Ooh.
What does that mean?
Well, it's one up from what I won, so I don't like them.
It's a good award. They won for outstanding conservation, basically. There's so much that they do, and there will be a whole article in the field, I would imagine now next year, which should be fantastic. But they do a lot of work with the river, so they're right on the River Rib.
The river what, Callum?
The River Rib.
Rib.
It's a fantastic little chalk stream river that runs through Hertfordshire, and it's got lots of trout in it. And they're working with I'm not sure if it's the Trout River Trust or something like that. They're working with them to make sure the river's all clean, and they're going to dig bits out and make the river go to its original route, I believe is what they were saying. And that will then hopefully they'll have more trout in there and just improve the habitat generally.
Hertfordshire,
Cool.
is that
Richard?
Is that London basically?
You're about 45 minutes from London, so you're not too far, but yeah.
It's not a proper English county like Wiltshire or Shropshire or something, is it? It's a weird one.
It's quite proper English.
A lot of BMW.
It's the land of Jane Austen. Well, yeah, they're right. There is that. But Hertfordshire, I went with Callum once, and I went in the footsteps of Isaac Walton, he of the Complete Angler, the first angling book, and we went fishing on the Lee, wasn't it, Callum?
Yeah, we went all round. So apparently he's from somewhere else originally, but a lot of that book is written across the banks of the River Lee, particularly King's Weir, and on the Stort as well. There's some stuff on the Stort, which I never knew, but there's also areas along the Lee, what's it called? The Lee Valley, which is called like Walton's Walk. There's all different areas around there that Isaac Walton is apparently meant to have fished. Well, he has fished. It's in the book.
And now, more importantly, Callum and Richard have fished there. And I caught the grand sum of nothing when I went. I was using a rod not quite as ancient as what he would have used, but I tried to use vintage tackle. And did you catch anything, Callum, when we were there?
I think I caught a chub of about 6 inches at best.
Yeah. It is quite funny because when you read, it's quite tough reading because he wrote it in 16 in the middle of the great unpleasantness when they beheaded a king and then put some ghastly man from Cambridgeshire, Harry, in his place, although he was from Huntingdonshire, Cromwell, wasn't he? And then he was writing around then, and you look at these trout and chub that he was catching, and they all sound as absolutely as fat as butter. And we managed to go and fish in the footsteps of Walton and catch the square root of nothing other than a fingerling chub. So yeah, not so great. What have you been up to, Richard?
I've got something in the past and something in the future that will be in the past when you hear this. So we're recording this on a Wednesday, and this will go out on a Friday. But on Thursday, I have to do 250 miles driving around North Wales, which North Wales doesn't sound like a very big place until you have to drive back and forth across it a couple of times. All because Amy is doing otter surveys for Cardiff University, something else. She's going to write some messages in the production chat now, and I'll find out exactly what we're doing. But I've just been given a list of all these places, and we have to, National Otter Survey of Wales. There we go. And Amy's doing the surveying, and I'm just doing the driving. But I take her out to a bridge in the middle of nowhere, and she goes looking for otter crap on rocks and signs of otters and things, and then comes back in with a Ziploc bag full of otter poo, and then has to live in the car with us until the next one. And we're going back and forth across Wales.
Who said romance is dead?
I know, it's date night, or it's perfect.
Yeah, it's one of the few things I think nearly everybody who lives in the countryside knows. Most things you say, what does, I don't know, stoat shit smell like? You go, I don't have a fucking clue. But the amazing thing is, everyone goes, oh yes, otter spraint. It's even got its own term for poo, which means it's very important. It smells of violets, apparently. Is that right? Can Amy confirm if it does smell of violets?
Amy says jasmine tea.
Jasmine tea? That's because you live in a posh part of the world. You keep coming along sort of saying, oh yes, we live on the barren wastelands of North Wales. Jasmine tea? We have Yorkshire tea or Thai foo here in Suffolk.
What about you, other Richard? What have you been up to? Apart from planting hedges in the Somme.
Planting hedges in the Somme, laying some hedges. Yeah. What else have I done? I've had a dog situation. Spaniels obviously have to be coming to this, and my poor dear Mabel had the shits, and usually you get a dog that sort of gets a bit runny, and you go, don't worry, I'll just go and put it on chicken and rice, and then squirt it with some of that stuff that looks like clay to bind them up. But I got to the point where Claire, my wife, took her to the vet, and she carried on going, and I was thinking, oh my God. And I suddenly I did the thing I tell everyone not to do, which is start Googling things about either your own health or animal health. And I started Googling stuff, and I diagnosed her with about 15 different things, which are all terminal, until she ran outside, went, and out came some garden twine from out of her backside. So basically the whole thing was she'd decided to eat some string, and that had obviously wrapped around it, and now she's past it. And thankfully Mabel the wonder dog is back with it. Harry, what have you been up to, my friend?
Right, last week I
What a
went to
segue.
the thank you for that. How do I top that, I was
I know. Do you need to add anything to that? Please, go on. See if you can bring the mood up.
What? Dog shitting out string is fascinating. This is the sort of, you got to go and put that thing.
Yeah,
this is content. This is content.
This is
I
what
have
they
to
come
say,
for.
that green twine does smell quite nice, doesn't it? I get it.
It doesn't now.
Understand
It
where
just come out my dog's ass.
What does it taste like?
We could tag you now as String Sniffer.
Oh, I knew
Celebrity
him.
String sniffer.
Going back to those nicknames.
I went to school with String Sniffer.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Harry, so what have you been up to?
I went to the RHS Peat Free conference, and I met some interesting people there speaking about why we should be peat free. I did a slightly better job of it than I did earlier, I think. I had to go on stage for the first time and have the public ask me questions. I was rather blindsided by the impressive people on stage with me. but we'll get there.
Who were they?
Oh, that's awkward. One guy was called Mark. I can't remember what he did, and the other guy
Oh,
was
Mark.
Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark. And then the other guy was called Richard. Interestingly, and he is the managing director of Provender Nurseries, who are 100% peat free. And we were just there to convince people why to go peat free and the shortfalls we find along the way. So that was fun. Got a free ticket to the RHS Glow afterwards as well. So went and saw some nice Christmas lights. Over the weekend, did a little bit of work at the nursery, packing things because it's dispatch season, and did probably one of the manliest things I've ever done, and that is change the front struts on my car. And I have two front
Ooh.
struts, like most people, two front struts on the car, but I had to do it 3 times because I might have
Did you have the
accidentally sheared a bolt, quite an important bolt that involved taking the whole thing apart again and starting again. But the car works.
Did you have those spring compressors that basically turn the whole thing into a grenade?
No, because that absolutely terrified me. So I paid the premium for having it pre-built. So I kind of sit somewhere between
there we
doing
go.
the full thing myself and but getting a mechanic to do it. I kind of sit in that middle, but still very impressive. So and other
They're
than that, I
heavy, aren't
really
they?
yeah. And so are hubs. I didn't realize a hub would be so heavy, but a few strained muscles, and we're here. The car makes fewer noises than it did before. A few twangs here and there, but it gets me from A to B, so that's all right. And I really have just been at work ever since. I got to finish early today because of this, but it's dispatch season, so I'm spending a lot of time packing uh, packing pallets to be sent to try and maybe make some money this year. So yeah.
I mean, that
Full on.
must be the challenge, isn't it? Because like you've said, is that we've got a situation at the moment where I was speaking with another nursery. This is not me trying to give you the dump here, Harry, but I was speaking with
Traitor.
another nursery today because I'm sorry, we'd run out of canes, so we went along to another nursery. Very, very, very good bunch of guys, and they were saying that they have now, thankfully, they hadn't ordered in all of their additional hedging plants, but they're saying because this countryside stewardship grant freeze, that they've had orders of, we need 10,000 plants, 15,000 plants, blah, 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 because we're going to do X, Y, Z. Because the countryside stewardship grant has been frozen, he's going, my hedging orders have literally stopped. Is that something that you've found as well?
Yeah, I mean, there has been a lull over the last couple of weeks, and we have been putting that down to the kind of Christmas break. But it does concern me. It does seriously concern me. It's not just the stewardship scheme; it's all grants. Are being reassessed. I think is the wording DEFRA have used, and it scares me. Luckily, up until 2 weeks ago, we sold about 50% of our stuff of our stock before people receive the bad news. And we've got a few things lined up for the new year. Fortunately, with charities and councils who they don't rely on grants so much. So that's going to get us through this season. I like to think it does seriously worry me for next year. And the more farmers I talk to, the more scared I get.
I was about to ask. Over here in Wales, we've got a different subsidy scheme. We've got this SFS, Sustainable Farming Scheme, which there was a big hoo-ha about earlier in the year because they announced, right, all farms have to have 10% of their acreage covered by trees to get the scheme. And now, in the last week or so, they've just rolled that back and said, okay, it doesn't have to be trees, but it has to be natural habitat. I've got to imagine there's a load of tree nurseries over here in Wales that have been planning ahead for this massive purchase of trees that was going to have to happen, that are now looking at their stocks going, what the hell are we going to do with all these? So if the government announces tomorrow, right, it's going to be under penalty of death, you have to plant a million, billion, twillion trees at some point in the future, what's the lead time between you've got to make all the trees in the world exist to you're able to sell them? How far ahead do you have to plan?
I have, well, so for us, so we order our seed in August to be sold 2 Septembers later. So you're looking at 13 to 14 months minimum, really, is the lead time on that. And that is to sell a 1-year-old tiny 20, 30 centimeter tree. And the stewardship schemes quite often specify 2-year-old trees, so you can just smack another 12 months on top of that if you want to adhere to that. Although I have to say, if you talk to the right advisor, you can often twist their arm on that.
Chopping and changing policy because they don't know what the hell they're doing it's not just a matter of, oh, well, we just won't do it then. There's a whole lead time there that's being screwed up by this, that is
Yeah.
throwing business into disarray at both ends of the scale.
Absolutely. We've already, if they suddenly cancel things, we've already invested the money to produce the trees. The trees are going to be produced. They're there in the tunnels, in the fields, growing.
You can't switch the tap off suddenly, can you, Harry?
No, it takes a while. So there's a lot of investment that will have already gone into producing trees for the 2025 to 2026 season. And then again, if they freeze all these grants and then suddenly they turn the tap back on again, there's going to be this lull. People have adjusted and stopped producing, lowered the numbers. If they suddenly come back and go, right, actually, here's a load of grants again, it's going to take a while to get going again. It's not very thought out, if you ask me.
Is there any chance that the ones that are currently grown will be sold into councils and places like that?
For me personally, so because we have the correct accreditation, which is the UK and Ireland sourced and grown and plant healthy, we personally can sell into councils, and we, by being peat free and, like I said earlier, doing everything the right / hard way, we are favoured by the councils. But there are a lot of nurseries out there that don't bother with that kind of thing. So bother is a bit flippant, but they've chosen not to do that. Yeah, and they can't sell to charities. They can't sell to councils, and yeah, it's tricky.
Councils. I want to ask something about councils. So we've
Mhm.
got a new thing, the Norfolk, what's it called, the NDR, basically the thing that meant you didn't have to drive through the middle of Norwich to go past Norwich to North Norfolk. So essentially, so that people could go to their second homes in Burnham Market, they built this nice new ring road around Norwich, and they
Sound like
and
Alan
along the
Partridge.
side of it to Yes, I know. That's it, actually. So when they're going along the NDR, the one of the things that they decided to do was to assuage their guilt, because they'd swayed through not only some superb farmland, but they'd also cut through some pretty pristine habitat, which once upon a time had sort of almost been wildfowler's paradise, just that bit there. And then through a bit of forestry, they decided to plant a load of trees and these ridiculous things called bat bridges across the road as well, which the bats went, do you know what? I'm not going to use them, but they cost like 55 grand a pop for this thing. Anyway, the trees, they planted them all along the side of them, and they planted them into these precipitous banks of subsoil that they'd stacked up where they'd dug out the actual road bit, and then set these gangs of guys to go and plant them in there. And then amazingly, honestly, the surprise on everyone's face as these trees then subsequently died, because they're in subsoil, they've been planted on banks, they dried out and just desiccated as you looked at them each time you drove past. I mean, do you feel a pang when you go and seem to sell these things to councils? Because it seems invariably that they're planted by people who go, stuff it, that'll be all right. And then the aftercare that these poor trees that you have taken, 18 months to go and get from tiny little seed to a viable living sapling, and then subsequently die. How do you feel about that? And who can we shoot to avoid this happening in the future?
That is so tricky to answer, as they're my customers. Honestly, I don't have an issue with the
Which
councils,
question are you going to answer first?
I, I, the people I deal with at the councils are fantastic, and they look after the trees. I think the issue, I think you might be slightly muddling it up there, and it's not necessarily the councils, but it's Highways England is where the issue lies. So we had the same issue on the A11 and the A14. A11 again, I drive under several bat bridges every day. They did their bit. They hit their quota. They planted the trees they said they were going to plant. No bats, but they planted the trees they said they were going to plant. They just didn't come back to do any maintenance, and they lost, was it 95% of every of the trees they planted? Yeah, so my issue isn't necessarily with the councils so much as it is with Highways England. I have heard, though, that they have changed their contractor because it was quite embarrassing for them all.
Good.
Fairly
So we
diplomatic
don't have to
answer.
shoot anyone then.
Not
Okay,
within
so
the
Highways
councils, no.
England, they're to blame. Callum, I'm interested. Have you ever planted a tree?
We have loads of trees at our yard, and I try and protect them desperately, but the horses tend to get them. But we have got a sycamore near the water butt that I've nurtured since it was a little sapling, and thankfully I think they're actually poisonous to horses. Horses haven't actually got it, so I have nurtured a tree. Also, my aunt, she suffered with MS, and she was the first person to buy a tree at Hatfield Forest that was alive. So she bought one just because she wanted to buy one, and now she bought that nearly 30 years ago, I think, and now it's quite sizable, but not as big as you'd think. 30 years and it's not grown enormous. You'd think it'd be quite large, but no. Well, you probably wouldn't, but most people would think an oak tree would be quite large after 30 years,
Yeah.
but it's not.
I don't think people realise how slowly trees grow.
I've seen a few times that everybody with these grant schemes is incentivized actually to plant trees
Yeah.
and hedges, but they're not incentivized to keep them alive, and they're almost incentivized because they can apply for it again after like 2 years or something. So there is an incentive to actually not keep them alive and then apply for the grant again. Is that right, or have I mixed that up?
Loosely speaking, yeah, that is right. So with the woodland grants, there isn't necessarily so much money to make it worthwhile to have them die and then replant them again. But with hedging, definitely the hedging grants at the moment are pretty good. But you're right. The grants are for planting. You plant your trees. You get the woodland officer to come over, count how many trees you planted. They sign off on it, and you get your grant money. And that's it. You walk away. And I think that's pretty bad. In fact, going way back to a thing Richard, our celebrity hedge layer, said way back, we need to be we need to be looking after
You
the
can't see
current
this, but all of
woodlands.
us are giggling. Brilliant. Well played, Harry.
I
Well
shouldn't
played.
be saying it because I grow trees for a living, but we really need to be looking after the trees that are already here. And the grants definitely, they're not that good, but there is hope. So there's a fantastic man called Rob Minty who works on the Elvedon estate, and I believe when he first joined, he was asked to come up with a 10-year woodland management plan, and he said, "There's no point in doing that. I'm going to do a 100-year woodland management plan." And they're like, "Okay, we'll listen to you." So there are people out there that are aware of the importance of looking after trees. We like to talk about establishing trees as opposed to planting trees. But as we've seen along the sides of the A14, the A11, the A45, they just, people are planting them, they've been planted, and they walk away, and that's it. And 95% die. And that is sad.
I've got a question that was actually set to me by Matthew at Aspect Forestry out near Halesworth. He's a good old boy, knows what he's on. And he asked me to ask you a question, which is, now, trees and hedges, I mean, you all take the piss out of me as celebrity hedge layer. The only reason why people are remotely interested in me is not because of my sparkling wit and repartee, it's because I do hedges. You do trees. Trees are hedges. They're all things that, nobody hates a tree, nobody hates a hedge. And he's asked a question: how does the forestry and woodland management industry get the public to view forestry in a positive manner? In other words, is they love the idea of hedges, they love the idea of trees, but ultimately, certainly in forestry, the purpose usually is to grow them into a crop, and then you'll cut them down, and then you will use that timber product for a multitude of different reasons, from construction to building beautiful furniture to even then eventually mulching bits up to turn back into the compost, which you then go and grow the latest tree from. So why is it that everyone loves trees, everyone loves hedges, but when I go and coppice a hedge, or Richard goes and coppices in a wood, you're suddenly akin in the public mindset to Pol Pot because you've cut this thing down. So how do we get the message across that trees are ultimately a crop which you'll take, but just on a lot slower harvest rotation than a bit of wheat?
Education, I guess. So Richard, you and I did that. I can't remember. There were several S's in the acronym, but that Suffolk School.
So it was just to explain. Harry and I did a thing which each year the Suffolk Agricultural Association do a Suffolk Schools Day where they bring lots and lots of kids to the Suffolk Showground and they show them lots and lots of things around in the rural sector. So not just farming. They show them here's a beekeeper, here's a woodland manager, here's a hedge layer, here's Harry grows trees, here's a deer stalker, here's a gun dog trainer, here's a pig breeder. Da 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 da. So yes, we went to that. So you think what more of that?
Yeah, and throughout schools. So we spoke to sort of maybe 10 different schools, maybe a year group from each, ages 8 to maybe 12. Beyond that, that's probably the first and last time they've ever heard about, even heard the term hedge laying. It's all about education. We need to continue teaching people that we can treat this like a crop, a sustainable crop. Uh, you know, yeah, it's education is the very short answer to that, from an early age, and then throughout school, up and through. I'd never even considered this as a job until I was about 25, and that's I got lucky, very lucky. But a lot of people, they don't know any of this kind of thing.
So if we're talking about education, this is a thing that's really close to Callum's heart because his family are a lot younger than mine, and you're trying to educate Xavier, your son Callum, in the countryside. Has he expressed to you that he wants to be a lumberjack?
Not quite. Not quite. No, I think going back to your question, what you just when you say about education, it's all well and good, but when you see people that are like cutting down trees and all that jazz, they're like the people in the abattoir. They're like the destroyers, but you don't realize that they're the people in the middle making the product. Um, so I try and teach my son stuff about forestry. We're always out in the woods and we go around and we've actually cleared out quite a lot of the wood down the bottom at the yard we have. And we cleared out a lot of old elders and stuff like that, so he knows about the light coming in and how that affects the forest floor. And right in the middle, there was so much dead stuff. There's no light hitting the canopy of the floor of the forest, and there's not much growing. And now we've cleared loads of it out. A lot more flowers and bits are growing. Although I still would like something more than just stinging nettles, but I should imagine that's a soil issue. I'm definitely not the expert, but he gets the idea of it. He gets the idea of it. But I think it is an educational piece for sure, um, and learning. I always thought when I see a hedge that's been coppiced to basically nothing, I never knew that the understory. Actually, it's probably a good time to discuss this. Coppicing a hedge just looks like almost like mindless vandalism to most people that live in a town. To just get, what do they get, the flail and cut the top off and do all of that stuff. They don't realise that bushing it up underneath creates habitat for all different animals. Nobody understands this outside of hedge laying. So absolutely, education is 100% what's needed.
I've actually Ross Guyton, who Harry knows very well from
He
Oak Bank
introduced us.
Woodland, he did introduce us to one another. And now Ross is a fascinating man. So he runs the woodland division of Oakbank, the wildlife conservation company. But he used to be the head of forestry for the Ministry of Defence. So he seriously knows his stuff. And his view on this, why cutting down, why are things being cut down seen as a bad guy, is because, and he's a chartered forester, bear in mind, is that he says, well, we don't explain, we do insufficiently well. So Harry and I took it upon ourselves. Well, actually, I invited Harry to come and join us at this Suffolk Schools Day, which I've done for the last 4 years, because I'm an evangelist about hedgerows. But what Ross says is that actually foresters are terrible at telling people about what they do. They don't use social media like I have done, probably ad nauseum. A lot of people are probably fed up to the back teeth of seeing my face whiffling on about hedges. But I think you've got to put there, because what he says is whenever they do anything about forestry, he says, and I'll quote him here, media such as the BBC always interview someone from the Woodland Trust or the RSPB as the authorities on woodland, rather than people who are actually forestry professionals. And I think that is probably very true. And the reason why is because the Woodland Trust and the RSPB, they have professional marketing departments, for pity's sakes. And if you're a small nursery like Harry, or a two-man band hedge laying outfit like we have got, or doing what Richard does, you don't have a marketing department. So you tend to go and not get rung up by the BBC to ask for comment about why you're felling that wood. And so QED, they'll get someone on there who will have a bit more of an agenda, and they'll start talking about something that suits their narrative rather than the actual professional angle. What's your take on that, Richard?
It kind of leads on from that, but I've accidentally had a career where I've taken people into wild places and started talking about that place and pointing at things for lots of different reasons. But one of the things that I sort of twigged was that people don't understand that there's a difference between a tree and a hedge and a woodland or a forest, and even woodland to forest. There's differences there. I mean, you look at a Sitka plantation compared to something that looks like it's from Winnie the Pooh. Well, it's obviously these idyllic 100-acre wood type things. When people think about trees, it all mushes together in the head. Well, it's a tree. It's just a tree. It was like, well, no, a tree standing on its own in the field is a very different habitat and doing a very different thing to that hedgerow over there that's only 15 years old and that probably should have been laid a long time ago. But it was in a planting scheme and it's not just been done, compared to that hedge over there that was managed in the 40s, but then has been either cut or flailed ever since then. And then a woodland's a very different thing. That a woodland, to take that and pin that as an example, when I was doing stuff with search and rescue teams working alongside search and rescue dogs, and that was when I first twigged onto the idea that woodlands breathe. They pull in air from the outside, from the edges, pull it in through under the canopy and push it out through the top in the middle. Because of the way the heat moves through a woodland, it brings air in and pushes it out the top. So that if you have a scent in a woodland, it sort of comes out through the canopy and rolls down the side to the outside of the woodland. That is, the woodland itself is a living, breathing animal. It's like looking at a coral bed or something like that. It's not just an ecosystem, it's a living thing all connected together. And then you've got all the mushroom stuff and all the interconnected mycelial threads in between all the roots and all these parasitic and then supportive mushroom networks that you get. All of this stuff, it's incredibly complicated to talk to people about. And you could start talking now and for the rest of your life, talk about woodland and trees and hedgerows and the interconnectedness of them all and still not get through everything. But when people look at it and they look, oh, tree planting scheme. Yeah, trees are good. Yeah, just get more trees in, more trees. It's like, all right, trees, where, what type, what are they doing? Where are the other trees? What are you going to do with them afterwards? What else could you do with that land? They hadn't even considered that those questions exist. And like you say, it's an education thing, but education where, to who, about what? It's such a massive subject.
Yeah. Well, see, my biggest bugbear in that we've got so much natural history programming is dedicated to stuff that lives in foreign parts rather than looking under our own feet. When Harry and I went to that Suffolk Schools project, I spoke to them about, why would you go and manage a hedgerow? What's the important for it? And I explained to them that if the thicker the hedge, the better the density is, the more likely is better habitat it is. And I was trying to sort of get them to think about what animals might live in there, and hedgehogs are pretty easy. And then I said, what might like to eat a hedgehog? And if a hedge was thicker, it might be able to escape from it. And they sort of looked at me blankly. They could not think of anything that would want to eat a hedgehog, because either they see them as prickly things that hurt when you touch them, or otherwise all the books they read as that hedgehogs are everyone's friend and they sort of hold hands to cross the road with badgers. And eventually I sort of said, look, it's a black and white thing. And these kids thought that it was either a skunk, a panda, or a zebra before they mentioned the word badger. And you think, goodness me, these kids know more about things that live in Africa, China, and North America than they do about what lives in their own country. So I think, it's interesting. Mary Colwell, bless her, she managed to get that GCSE in natural history onto the statute book tough, and then the Conservatives lost the general election. And I can see that they're going, oh no, Labour have gone, no, that's a toffs thing. That is natural histories for posh people. So we'll push that to one side. That's going to get shelved. I don't know how we go about doing it, but my answer to the question personally is that hedges are now something that became quite a hot topic. People want to know about them. And why is that? I wouldn't say it's solely down to me. That would be completely incorrect. But partly was because I gob off all the time on Twitter to 14,000 people, over it is, about hedgerows. And they become interested. I think what the forestry guys have got to do is start doing when you want to go, and don't expect the BBC to come knocking on your door, because they'll just take the easy option and go and talk to the RSPB and the Woodland Trust. You've got to go out there and say, hey, I'm here. I'm Ross Guyton from Oakbank and I know a huge amount. And now we're going to go and talk to Harry, which is why I wanted him to come on our podcast, because I thought, well, it might just go and inspire some people to go and start thinking about how this magnificent tree starts its life off as a little tiny embryonic seed. And particularly because Callum is very interested in that next generational staff.
Just as a useful point on that, there is a website called World of Books where you can get stuff that is very, very cheap. I bought my son a collection of 4 books that's got, I think it's Shore, Forest, Insects, and and Birds. A collection of 4 books. It cost me about £10. Of course, they're secondhand. They get delivered to your door. My son finds it absolutely fascinating. You can go through. He knows what a badger is. He knows what a hedgehog is. He looks through it, can see all the insects. There's so much information in those things. It's fantastic if you want to get your kids up to speed on wildlife. World of Books, and that will be in the show notes, because Amy will do it because she's a legend.
I can tag on another one to that as well. If you want to work with your kids and get them interested in outdoor stuff, the Field Studies Council do these sheets, which are like ID sheets, but really, really simple, really common. And they go right down into the granularity of species, but they do just one that's like woodland animals, woodland plants, things you'll find in a meadow, stuff like that. And it's really easy for probably slightly older than Xavier, but they're easier for kids to get their head around. Like, this thing is this and this thing is this, and then you flip the other side of the sheet and it's got all this information, so they can really go down to like GCSE level information. The Field Studies Council, but you get them in outdoor shops. I think Cotswold Outdoors sell them, bizarrely, but we'll put a link in there. Yeah.
Final question. I've got one more question for Harry. Right. How do you go and become a nurseryman? Because, or more to the point, how do you get into working with trees? Lots of people love talking about them. We need less talkers and more doers. How do you become a doer?
I mean, It's fairly simple, if I'm honest. You know what it's like when you're working with the land and things. What people appreciate is initiative and a want to work. So if you can find someone and you're willing to work your way up, everyone's constantly looking for stuff. If you're a hard worker, you'll be taken on at a nursery somewhere. I'm always looking for hardworking people. I've got an amazing team at the moment. I'm very fortunate. But if you're hardworking, you have initiative. But if you want to do it my way, I went and studied, and then I dossed about for a few years, and then I was handed this opportunity to me on a plate. So those are the two different ways to go about it, to be honest. I like the hardworking initiative way, work your way up. No one that works for me had anything to do with trees before, but they are all now. I would consider them all experts in the field because they're interested in it. They want to learn, and so we have really interesting tree chats all the time, constantly, and that's what matters to me. And it's such a small industry that everyone knows everyone, and word gets out. And it wouldn't surprise me if someone at least was attempted to be poached from me because I talk about how amazing my staff are, and it really is as simple as that. Turn up, bit of interest, bit of initiative, and that's how you do it. You don't need any formal qualifications to do what I've done.
I've got one final question, and it is a big question. What is the ultimate reason that we need to manage woodland, plant more, and have hedges?
I don't know about the ultimate reason, but there are a lot of obvious reasons. So habitat and carbon sequestration are the ones that everyone talks about all the time, and I don't think I need to go on about that. But there are other smaller things, and I think quite an important one of these things that no one thinks about is water management. If you have a nice, healthy forest, nice, healthy woodland, you're going to massively impact the way water flows through your land. And as we're set to get wetter winters, we need to be thinking about this already over the last few years. The uptick in flooding has been absolutely phenomenal. And you can put your sandbags out, you can make big concrete dams, but ultimately, if you plant trees along the watercourse or at the bottom of a watercourse and it's managed well and it's healthy, that will, they talk about this spike in water flow that will help level things out. And that's going to be so, so important over the next 10, 20, 30 years as we start to see, water levels rise. I think that would be the ultimate thing that's not really spoken about.
I mean, there's on that level, the hedgerows. We've all talked about the connectivity of habitats and the traditional uses in farming, either as a barrier or as protection. But that's something that is very much a modern phenomenon. Is that we put a lot more chemicals on land than we used to, or even if you're using farmyard manure. One of the most important things that a hedgerow, if you've got a field rimmed by a hedgerow, you're going to have a ditch. And so, therefore, that root system of a healthy hedgerow, one that has been managed, coppiced or laid, then it comes back, it puts on more root density, it is filtering all the nasty stuff that's on that field and trying to run off, that goes then into water courses. And, water is both a bad thing in flooding terms, but is also the stuff of life. So, therefore, if we're pumping stuff onto fields so that we can eat food, then some of it's going to leach off. And hedgerows around the edge, they are filtering that bad stuff so we'll have cleaner water. I mean, it is the most fundamental thing. Trees and hedging plants, they are absolutely fundamental to all human life. And I think, though, that the misunderstanding that they have to be managed to be effective is missing, and that perhaps is back to that point of education again. We need education, and it's not just kids who need education. It's actually a lot of adults, and unfortunately a lot of the people who need educating are people who are big fat gobshites who like talking about stuff that they have no clue about. They've been overexposed by the media, and that they seem to think that they have something that needs to be said. Well, they don't. Actually, they'd be better off shutting up, going back and, I don't know, boiling their head or something, and that would be it. Right, any road. So
I've got some housekeeping to do for
what's that?
the show, which we've had another review. I
What?
know. At least one other person is listening to us. So we've got a listenership of at least 4 now, I think. Listen from the sprayer cab, all 3 back to back, while spraying 100 acres of Suffolk asparagus. Great mix of ramblings, silliness, and opinion. So I don't know which one's which. Which one's silliness, which one's opinion, and which one's ramblings.
Well, that's just all 3 is Callum.
I'll take silliness for 3.
Yeah. I'm rambling. I think. No, on my opinion. I'm just opinion without asking questions.
Your mushroom.
A mushroom, yeah.
Yeah. Mitochondrial, whatever it's called. Right, Harry, have you got anything that you want to that you want to say before we go and wrap this up?
I'd like to really double down on that education point. I was talking to a tree guard supplier. I wasn't talking. Lizzie was talking, my assistant manager, but they had sent a load of guards out to a big estate to trial, and the people planted all the trees inside all the guards or whatever, and they reported back to the guard supplier and said, "I'm sorry, but your guards are rubbish. Every single tree has died." So the guard supplier was thinking, "Oh God, what's happened here? Can I come out and see the site, please?" So the guard supplier went out to site, went up to the first tree, lifted up the guard, saw the tree was planted, or wasn't planted, it was just placed on top of the soil. They went to the next one, exactly the same, went around every single tree, hadn't been planted, it had been dropped down inside the guards because the instructions were, you put the tree on the ground, you put the guard on top, and it will grow. So that, I think that perfectly talks, encapsulates our point about education, not just young education, but older people, adults, sensible adults who you think should know better. They don't know. Why don't we know this? Why aren't we being taught this? So yeah, it's not a new point. It's just doubling down on an old point we've made.
Let's try and bring this thing back into harbour at some point. If people wanted to find you, Harry, what's the best way to get hold of you? Where would you like people to go next, straight after listening to this episode?
I can never remember what our social media handles are. I don't. I'm not in control of any of that. But if you were to search for Rhymer Trees and Hedging or Rhymer Trees, you will find us on Google. Just rhymertrees.co.uk is the website, and that has all the links to everything on there. And I like to think if you search peat-free trees Suffolk, you'd also find us. But yeah, presumably our handles are just Rhymer_trees_and_hedging.
They will all be in the show notes. The contact information for the other 3 of us is all in the show notes, because nobody actually listens to this and then goes straight away to type something into Instagram. You just go to the little notes bit underneath. We've got some other bits to share in there as well. So young Richard Negus there writes stuff for various places. So I'm sure there'll be some article he's written between the last episode coming out and this one that'll be somewhere.
I've written a particularly good scribe hound piece this week called "The Countryside Lies Bleeding," which seems to have captured the imagination of the readership about just how blimmin' disastrous this budget is. Because I don't like to talk about politics, and I'm very complimentary about Rachel Reeves.
For the same outlet, I wrote something.
I enjoyed that.
It's about, I wrote something about mental wellness and the countryside, not mental health as such, but mental wellness and sort of the resilience that comes from doing small tasks, even though everything seems like it's all gone up the crapper. You can go off and do something small and positive to at least show that you matter in that moment. So I wrote a piece about that, and both are linked out. Callum, have you written anything recently?
I actually did write something, and it's actually gone online. It went in print about a month ago, but it went online. I wrote a piece about how packing your camera gear in a light way, so you're only carrying minimal kit, can actually, what's the word? Just encourage you to shoot more, so you're not burdened with tons of stuff, because I find that happens to me a lot. I wonder if it's the same in shooting as well. Carry lots of stuff. You don't want to go further. You don't want to wander up that creek a little bit further. You don't want to go across that marsh. How just unburdening yourself with absolutely everything and all the kit and all the kitchen sink can be helpful.
You do it with fishing, certainly. Like
absolutely.
You start off, you've got a few bits, and then you buy all the magazines and you look at all the YouTube videos and you buy all the things, and then you end up with 14 tackle boxes that you're trying to go to the water's edge with, and then you look over to the person that's been doing it for 50 years, and they're back to having like 3 different things, and that's all they use.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Excellent, chaps. Well, I'm going to go and spend some precious time with my son because I haven't seen him all week. And then I've got to do some hedge laying tomorrow and the day after, because we've got to try and fit it in whilst we're getting this brief patch of seemingly good weather, and whilst we still can, before Rachel Reeves just literally bans hedge laying, just says stuff it. He's not even going to have any money. I'm going to ban it because it gets in the way of solar panels.
Rachel Reeves, that completes the bingo card. I've
There you
got
go.
a full house. And we got vitriolic as well, which
Vitriolic, yeah.
That's all 3.
Yeah, I mean, do you notice I hadn't mentioned the name of our Prime Minister because he's so intensely dull? Did you watch him, talking about trees, did you watch him go and switch on the Christmas lights outside Downing Street? Oh my God, he can't even bloody switch on Christmas lights. I mean, imagine being his child. It must be the worst thing ever. Hooray, it's Christmas Day, Daddy. Well, yes, but... And then he'll go and sort of give you some really dull thing that he does.
Just for balance, I can also point out that other political parties are available and they all seem equally useless.